Okay, so we're just letting people into the course right now, into the call. Hello, hello. I think we're expecting, so we have 3. I think there were 2 more waiting to join the call, and then we'll be expecting a few more as time goes on. So hello, happy Wednesday afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. This is a live office hour where I'm just available to answer questions and discuss my thoughts on the course and perhaps to muse a little bit about what we'll be discussing as time goes on, or really anything to do with the course, which is not actually started in earnest. I think it's only the introductory module for this week. So hello, Eve. So welcome. Thank you for registering. Excited to have everybody here. If you want to ask questions, you can either type it into the chat box, but you can also feel free to just speak out loud. If you'd like to unmute yourself at any point, feel free to. I'm just generally available for question answering right now. Everything will be recorded and available afterwards, so please keep that in mind. But yeah, hello, welcome to generative AI for journalists. So I will be idling, or if anybody would like to have me speak about a certain topic, I'm also happy to just do that. In terms of course content for the introductory module, it's really just a matter of setting up Jupyter Desktop, which is, depending on your platform, either hello, Eve.
Hi.
Hi. And hello to everybody.
Hello.
Just to repeat myself again, it's this will be recorded. Feel free to unmute yourself and talk at any point if you have questions. And I'll just be sitting here ready to answer. So
I really appreciate this content. It's amazing. I mean, for me, I have a lot to learn, and I really appreciate the way you're presenting it. I was curious to know what your impression is of this drama going on Copy AI and how you think it's going to affect us.
I had some putting aside my thoughts on the actual drama, which I find endlessly fascinating, and it's kept me up at night, keeping up with all the little updates, and it's so setting aside my own interest in the events, I think it speaks a little bit to how rough and tumble the beginning of the AI industry has been. It's ChatGPT was only released a year ago, and we've very quickly come into a certain state of things where certain terms are industry accepted, certain practices are now becoming best, and everything is slowly getting set into stone. But really, we've only been learning how to implement language models into workflows really seriously only for less than a year at this point. And so OpenAI, while they've raised an impressive amount of money, while I know people who work for OpenAI and they're great people and it's a super organization and it seems really solid, I think that's something of a facade. And it's probably not a surprise for me to express this, but I think it shows something about how shaky the foundations are for working with generative AI. And so in this course, I'm purposely trying to teach everybody to run local language models on your own computer. So downloading this technology, downloading something that can, like a coherent ChatGPT-like language model that you can run on your own computer, I'm making a point of showing how to do that, because I think that will be a really solid way to move forward. Because once you have the technology on your computer, once you're familiar with working with it, once you can handle everything that OpenAI normally does for you, then you are repatriating it a little bit and you're maintaining some sort of independence. So I think, what does it really make me think? I think it makes me feel good that I've gone in this direction for the course, because I feel it adds a little bit of, it reduces technical debt to not have to depend on another company's services. In a way, I mean, we're depending on Hugging Face, but really everything they host is hosted elsewhere. So at some level, while it's good for privacy, it's also good for just making sure that the skills you learn will last a little bit longer in case some major company goes belly up. At least you'll still be able to run your workflows on your own laptop or computer or what have you. So I still find it interesting though. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. I just wanted to kind of understand in the human learning, not the machine learning process, but particularly mine, it's how deep we need to go with the learning in terms of having notions, for example, of linear algebra, etc. Because some of the texts I've learned, I've been reading so far. Some of them are quite, let's say, complicated for me, at least. For example, that one about the yesterday I was reading the word to vet. That one,
yeah.
it's
Yes,
quite
that-
it's quite you
yeah.
need some kind of knowledge. So I've started to going back to the the trigonometry, etc. So to understand vectors, etc. So how deep we need to go in terms of following up with the course.
So you are going into it much deeper than I might have expected you to, and I think that's really my fault. Things like Word2Vec I find are interesting. In many of the works that we'll be looking at, many of the readings, it's necessary really only to read the syllabus, if there is one, or the introductory chapter, or the equivalent of that.
It is very interesting. That's for sure. Very, very much.
It's I'm certainly not a student of mathematics, and I've taken mathematics. I've done it at the graduate level. I'm interested in it, but for a course like this, it's really more a matter of understanding what Word2Vec is, because the technology hasn't really gone very far past it. So if you can get a good handle of that technology, then you're primed to understand language models as they've become. I think two things to keep in mind. So first of all, no, it's absolutely not necessary. If you have a personal interest in understanding Word2Vec, then for sure read the whole paper, read up on the mathematics, try to get a sense of it. But knowing that it exists and that it was a very epochal piece, I think, in the world of language modeling and natural language processing is really all my aim was with sharing that article. That being said, even if you do understand Word2Vec, it's not necessarily the case that will translate over to language models, because while we understand them on a mathematical level, that doesn't translate into how they actually work. So the purpose of this course, and if you're interested in this course, is not learning so much the technology so much as its implications, or how to use the technology, or having or making an impact using it. It's not entirely necessary to understand how the language models work. And this goes out to everybody in the call. It's people who actively research language models research it because it's a black box, because we do not understand how these models work. We can come up with a cyclic graph. Like we can say that in essence, it's a series of multiplication steps. Really, they're multiplying a large array of numbers, two-dimensional array of numbers, with another array of numbers and another array of numbers, and it's a series of multiplication steps. But that doesn't really tell us how it's able to write an essay, how it's able to write a news article, and there's nothing clear about its learning process that explains how it's capable of doing this. And so it's an active area of research trying to understand why they work. Word2Vec is simpler to understand, of course. And there's value in learning how it works, because what they did in Word2Vec is really quite normal in natural language processing. And if you're ever interested in data science, or if you're interested in learning about working with n-grams or simple text analyses, it's an excellent paper. But I guess to answer your question, it's not expected to study linear algebra for this course, no. But that being said, I did try to offer readings that appeal to people at different levels. So if your interest is in learning about the technology, learning about the mathematics behind the technology, and you do get through the readings and you are interested in the readings and you're interested in how these models work, excuse me, please feel free to ask me at any point. I'm always happy to offer resources. I'm always happy to offer more in case you're interested in a particular direction. It's really the Word2Vec piece, and then Stephen Wolfram's long essay on how ChatGPT works and why it works, if that's the title. That is an excellent piece, and that starts from first principles on what natural language processing is. How do we work with words? How do we assess the variables between words, the interrelationships between words and when they appear in a text, and the probabilities and gradient descent and everything from that. He goes through very well in that piece. I think on the whole, I'm not sure about how other Night Center courses do this, but I don't think the readings are necessarily super required. For example, the quiz questions come from my lectures, not so much the readings. So, but I feel that if one is here to learn about generative AI and more specifically language models, it's better for me to offer resources in all regards than not to. So we have quite a number of people in the call now. Once again, in case you didn't hear me from the very beginning, this call will be recorded. It will be available afterwards and a video on demand. And I'm here to answer questions. If anyone runs into issues installing Jupyter Lab Desktop, be sure to tell me so I can help in some way. I'm on a Mac, so I wasn't able to verify the installation process on a Windows PC. I assume it's as easy as it is on Mac. But in case it is not, please ask in the forums and I'll respond. There is something that I forgot to mention in my installation video, and that is if you open up Jupyter Lab, it might complain about not having Python installed on your computer, which may or may not be true. And then it will offer a little button towards the bottom of the Jupyter Lab window. And if you click on that button, it will install Python for you. And then it will let you do everything in the course. So all code I go through in the course is available in the readings for every week. It's a zip file. If you download that zip file, it will give you a notebook with the code that we've written up until that point, together with the data that I prepared for the class, which is just some documents from my local municipal data registrar or something along those lines. I'm not even sure what the office would be called. But anyway, so all materials are provided, readings are provided, and just let me know if you have any questions. Let's see. I'm going to open up the readings and maybe I can come up with an interesting discussion topic just based off of what I find. So let's find my syllabus. I think it is instructor-led. Yes, generative AI. Course outline. Or no, sorry, my bad. I think I actually go into Google Drive, which is where we keep our documents. Sorry, everybody, one moment. Oh, there might not be readings for the first week. Or are there? The introductory course. Anyway. Oh, thank you. I can also speak a little bit about myself, if that's helpful, just to get a sense of where I'm coming from in this course. My name is Sil. I'm a grad student at McGill. I'm finishing up my master's in the digital humanities, which means most of my coursework is in computer sciences, but I work with professors in the humanities to complete research projects using technology like language models. My research has been across a number of domains, but generally it's in communications. So I have one project where I try to simulate the American Supreme Court using 9 GPT-2 models trained on each individual justice in the Supreme Court, and it's quite accurate, despite knowing nothing about legal history or precedent. I have another project where I try using a language model to predict editorial trend shifts at the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And then I'm variously interested in narratives. I study quite a bit of fiction using language models and language models themselves, so how they work. I've been interested in for about the last 5 years. So I've been studying language models since 2019. A little bit before it was cool, but it was, at least my part of the internet, it was quite popular at that point. And I've always been amazed by how fluent they seem to be. From Chris, there were 2 readings in Atlantic article talking about the lossy approach of GPT-3. So Ted Chung. There was also one New York Times story about using AI for writing news articles. Right, so that's an interesting one. The New York Times, I believe, banned ChatGPT on their building. So then you can't use it when you're logged onto the Wi-Fi network. And I think the Washington Post did something similar. So there was a movement in American newsrooms to not use ChatGPT because if you copy and paste, I think the higher ups were imagining that if reporters or journalists were copying and pasting and copy into ChatGPT, it would be leaking proprietary information to OpenAI, which is true. So OpenAI, of course, does not necessarily promise not to trade on your data. They don't promise to keep your data private or secure. They have no incentive to. Of course, they are a private company. They want to make money. And ChatGPT, they were burning a lot of money just running it. It was about $1 million a day, I think I read somewhere. So they spend quite a bit of money to just run these models. And so they are incentivized, in fact, to make use of your private data. So major newsrooms blocked ChatGPT, and when Google saw that, of course, the Google News Lab, which I believe is run out of the marketing branch at Google, they went, wait a minute. Maybe we can create a product here to entice the executives at the Times. And so they prepared a chatbot and tried to sell it to the people at the Times. And once word got out, they were lambasted for that. I think, as they should be, maybe, perhaps. Because a chatbot, if you're doing that for an end-to-end, if you're replacing a journalist from end to end, you're not only replacing a person, but you're also replacing it with something that will almost assuredly do the job worse. I think one constant fear with language models is that they have the power to automate away jobs, which has been the fear of robotics for a long time. And Google, in some way, I think, was followed that notion because they presented to the Times a chatbot where if you gave them, Elizabeth, it has a wall, right? My bad. I don't know why it is, but I don't run into that wall here in Canada. But it's I'll provide a PDF. Sorry, my bad, of course. Where was I? They were presenting the Times with the chatbot where if you gave the chatbot documents, it would be able to write an article, which is not necessarily what anybody wants from generative AI. I think in the publishing world, they've also been very scared, but of AI. But over the last year, there's been this growing sense that while they can write, they never seem to be able to write for free, write well. There's always like a gap. So one early research question was whether we could get GPT-2 to write Nobel Prize winning literature, and we could not, and GPT-3 cannot, GPT-4 cannot. And in fact, their ability to write creative fiction seems to be getting worse over time for a variety of reasons, but mostly it has to do with how they get the chatbot to be very safe and corporate sounding. And so these models are getting worse, and because we don't understand how they work in the first place, it makes us interested in figuring out why can they not write well? What is it about human writing that makes it difficult for language models to replicate? And there's all sorts of reasons, but I think really what that means is, especially for people in creative fiction writing, it meant their jobs were more secure than perhaps initially assumed. And so tools like pseudowrite no longer write fiction from scratch. Instead, they're designed to be co-writing tools. So you use GPT not to write something for you, but to write together with. So it's a useful tool for getting over writer's block, for example, but it's not necessarily a tool for doing your job entirely. And journalists, I think, are particularly well suited for working with generative AI because there always has to be boots on the ground. Investigative journalism, for example, is very dependent on relationships, on talking to people about going to places physically. And a chatbot, even if you give it a number of PDFs and it's able to write an article, is lacking that whole process that goes into writing an article, a long form piece. So generative AI is not something I think should necessarily, is not necessarily something to be scared of. And in fact, I think if you look into it enough and you work with it enough, you begin to get the sense that it's really quite a good working partner more than anything. So I'll be taking that stance in this course. It's something to explore. Generative AI is something to consider, to work with, to get a sense of. And so, yeah, it's that times piece. We've seen the same argument come up and again, and especially with the WGA strikes in Hollywood. They were scared about generative AI replacing actors, replacing script writers, and yeah, there's some fear to that. There's some truth to that. But these models are not necessarily getting any better right now, which is something interesting. They don't seem to be getting smarter. GPT-4 is not noticeably better at writing than GPT-3. Sometimes it's able to be more logical at times, but it's not necessarily better or like all the way around. Like you can go, yes, that was generated by GPT-4 and that was generated by GPT-3. There's no clear difference when you assess their outputs by visually. So my interest is in using language models to consider new questions, to consider new workflows, maybe to speed up certain things, but never to automate away a position or someone. And yeah, Elizabeth.
Another comment. I've been playing a little bit with ChatGPT and the other chat at Hugging Face. I don't remember the name, the chatbot. But for example, asking about anonymous people. For example, who is the name of my mother? And the first answer is, sorry, I don't know about that. But if you insist, then the chatbot creates a fantasy, which is weird. I mean, absolute fantasy. The second or the third attempt, the answer that you get back is it's an invention, I guess. Why is that?
That's the one fascinating property with these models, and the reason that's precisely why I study fiction with them. They in the world of modeling, we say they are not grounded. They are not grounded in truth. They are not grounded in the world. Humans are very, very contextual. We have a particular perspective. We go through life on our own course. We talk to people. We understand that someone is not us. We know the world is a certain way because we have eyes and we hear and we smell and we taste. And we know certain things to be true because we are embodied in a world, and this world is our world. Language models do not have a sense of self. They will say I, but there is no consciousness there. And moreover, they do not have eyes. They do not talk. They cannot hear. They're not embodied, and that's very important. As fluent as they might be, they don't have a surefire way to understand that something is the way it is, or that something is not real, or that something is real, or that something is not real. They lack that mechanism for verifying things in the real world as we do. So they hallucinate. There's a number of reasons for why they hallucinate. That's the term for them making something up. One reason is simply because they don't know what is true and what is not. Another reason is because trained to continue conversations. That is what they are designed to do, and they are not capable of not continuing the conversation. We force them to continue the conversation like autocorrect on a phone, and the model will try to not always be correct, but rather be most probable, and that's a very fine distinction. They always try to give you a very realistic response, but not necessarily. That realistic response in its mind is not always necessarily what is actually factual or correct. And it might be that what is the name of my mother? The name that it gave you back is actually quite a common name in its training data or something. Like it might, yeah, sorry.
No, what's the name? But who is, and I put the name of my mother. Who is,
sorry, you put in the name.
I started with some very, let's say, obvious questions like who painted Mona Lisa or etc. And then I started to go like more and more, how would I put that? More and more asking things more specific or unknown. And I put who is, and I wrote the name of my mother. And at the first attempt, the chatbot answered, "Sorry, I cannot answer you because I don't have any information about that person." And I insisted, and I asked back again and again, and I think at the third attempt, it started to create the fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's because it doesn't necessarily have a mechanism for keeping things true and coherent and real. So it's like they're daydreaming constantly is a way to think about it. And it's what allows the model to respond to questions. It's what allows the model to function and be realistic. But because they're not grounded, because they lack access to the truth. And the whole point of this course is in journalism, that's very scary, of course, because with journalists, it's trust but verify, verification, verify, verify, verify. Keeping things not only informative but truthful is extremely important, as dangerous as the T word has become. And so a part of this course is teaching how to is learning how to give language models access to truth, to like a vetted source of information, to ground them in a certain data set. And so you can let the model become a little bit more grounded, and that involves giving it documents to read from, which is what we'll be teaching in this class. But overall, they because of their very architecture, they're designed to daydream. They will always hallucinate to some degree, which makes using them, you have to be very careful about when to deploy a language model, when to make use of it. It's you picked up on probably what is their biggest problem, and in my opinion, will probably continue to be their biggest problem, because there's no easy way to fix these models to prevent from hallucinating, because that's how they work. They hallucinate everything. From the model's perspective, what it said to you is no different than it thinking that the capital of Canada is Ottawa, or it from its perspective, true and false, right, and true and false are essentially the same because it does not have access to the world. Which makes it a little scary to work with. But James, you've had your hand up forever.
Yes, I was wondering which language translation programs you use, how they differ, if they differ in any significant ways. I use a couple of them and compare them. For example, with Spanish, Bard is a little bit different from Google Translate, which is a little bit different from I forget which. Oh, DeepL. And do those models have different formats or approaches to doing translation, or is it just they're all doing the same thing except coming back with slightly different results because they're drawing on different databases?
Well, the biggest differentiation is what you just said. Yeah, they're coming on from different data sets, but their actual architectures do differ significantly. And you can think of it as like, so the chatbots like Bard and ChatGPT, they are one group, and then the second group is like DeepL and Google Translate. So first off the bat, I use DeepL personally. I find it's quite good for the languages that I translate in from, like Dutch, French, Mandarin, and Japanese. But the way they work, so the first large language model that was quite good, so GPT, the model inside ChatGPT, descends from GPT-3, and then GPT-2, and then GPT. And GPT was one half of the model inside Google Translate. So in 2017, some researchers at Google released a new model they called the Transformer for Google Translate. And it's composed of essentially the model takes words in one language and then converts the words into numbers and then turns the numbers back into words in a different language. And it does this sentence by sentence by sentence. And when they released the model, someone figured out that if you take the section of the model that's for converting numbers into words, you can get that and put it into a loop, and it will just make word after word after word after word after word. And that is GPT. So ChatGPT is technically half of Google Translate, you can think of it. And Bard is the same. So they are like half of Google Translate, but they are very good at translating nonetheless for reasons we still are not sure of. That being said, DeepL and Google Translate are probably, so they retain the original full architecture. And so for certain tasks, they're still better and they're faster and they're less liable to hallucinate, because once you give the model the ability to just come up with infinite amounts of text, it will start to make things up, like I was explaining. That being said, I think I've seen people use ChatGPT for certain. This is it. There was a fun thing I saw on Twitter. You can get ChatGPT to speak another language for you very simply, and then you can try to talk to it for language learning. So I was doing that with Dutch. I had it pretend to be like an 8-year-old kid speaking Dutch, because that's my level, and it was fun to just be able to talk to it and my very rudimentary Dutch, and it was helpful. But DeepL, I think right now is considered still the industry leader for a translation tool.
I noticed that I do a lot of translation from German because my daughter lives in Germany. But Google Translate is a lot better with Spanish than it is with German, and I suspect it has to do with the size of the database, the number of documents in Spanish is, I'm sure, much greater than the number of documents in German, for example.
I can only speculate. I would assume so. Yeah, because I think their general way for translating is approximately the same. So it's really a matter of how high quality the model is, and because models only ever try to imitate what they're given, it's dependent on the documents, of course.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, of course. Translation, yeah. So actually, there's a little bit of an interesting history here. So language models and tools like ChatGPT are derived from the tools, are derived from Google Translate, in fact. And Google Translate is really not very different than attempts at machine translation back in the 1950s. So back when Claude Shannon, a mathematician working in the US, proposed the language model, the technology inside ChatGPT, they proposed it for translation purposes originally. And so IBM, I believe, worked with Warren Weaver, who was Claude Shannon's co-worker, to create a program for translating from English to Russian and Russian to English. And in 1955, I think they demonstrated it on a mainframe, and it was in the news. And it was an attempt at like a feel-good American-Soviet relations like exchange thing. Like, we can translate into Russian and they can read English. And but there was a bit of a politics to machine translation at first, and really the technology in essence has remained the same ever since. We just found that as we make these models larger and larger, that is to say, we give them more and more data, for some reason they become intelligent, and why that is, we don't know. From Leonardo, so hallucinations might give you problems when you train a model on your local computer to find patterns in a series of PDFs or CSVs. It might give you problems. So the risk of hallucinations go down if you use a larger model. So if you use a more intelligent model, and also if you give the model the documents in their prompt versus training the model on the documents. So you can train the model on the documents, and it'll learn to speak like the documents. It'll learn the documents, so to speak. But it might not necessarily really understand the documents. You might continue to run into hallucinations. So really the best approach is to give the model the documents in the context, which is becoming more possible. So Claude, which is Anthropic's model, it's an offshoot of OpenAI. They came out with a new model yesterday that supports 200,000 tokens, and really, technically, that's the same model as Claude 2. They just release the limiter and they allow it to consume up to 200,000 tokens, but that's about 500 pages of text. So when you drag and drop documents into the model, it doesn't train on it. it just reads it all at once when answering your question, and you can give it 500 pages of text to answer your question with at the time of inference when you're running the model. So there's a fine difference between what we call in-context learning. So when you give the model the document versus training the model on the document and having it try to remember the document when answering your question. And in this class, we'll be talking about. So you train to find the patterns, the how, and then they read it. Yeah, I mean, you could train it on examples of the pattern. That's possible, and then you give it the model. You give it documents to find patterns from. That's certainly an approach. You could also give the model, so like a classic example is what's called few shot prompting, which means you give it like 3 examples of the pattern, and then you give it a document. So you give it like, say, 3 examples of a pattern, and then you give it a document, and then the model will look at the examples and try to get a sense of what the pattern is like, and then it will look for the pattern inside the document that you give it. So you don't necessarily have to train the model at any point. You just give it a bunch of examples. And in this course, we'll be doing retrieval augmented generation, which I think is discussed in the syllabus, but really retrieval augmented generation is this idea that you augment the model, you augment its generation of words by giving it the ability to retrieve information from documents. So in this class, that example will be embedding a bunch of documents. So taking a series of documents, splitting them up, embedding those chunks, and then giving the model the ability to retrieve relevant documents at the time of generation. So rather than always training a model, you just give it the ability to find the answer for itself from a series of documents. And there's an important distinction there. We won't be training models in this class. I think I have time for one more question. So it was supposed to run until 3:45 Eastern Standard Time. I'm always available in the forums as well. And yeah, hey Sam.
Hey, I'm jumping on late, so if this has been answered, I'll just read the recording. But are there any image generation tools that are 100% safe from a copyright perspective at this point? Some stuff around like image licensing, but we were just wondering that for our newsroom.
So I think there are now 2 companies that indemnify images generated with their tool. So indemnifying means like if someone tries to sue you for copyright violation, they'll pay you for your legal fees. It's Adobe and OpenAI. You can't be 100% certain that they didn't use copyrighted information in their training because, well, they need millions of images to train from, and nobody's going to look through like the millions of images to verify the copyright of every single one. But you can be reasonably certain if they're willing to defend you in court. So look for companies that indemnify, and as far as I'm aware, that continues to be just OpenAI and Adobe. And OpenAI, even I don't trust them when they say they'll protect you in court, because they threw that in as a little tacked on note in their latest Dev Day presentation. It was a very little like snippet of text that said that, by the way, we'll protect you in case someone tries to sue you. So whether they'll really do that is another question, and I would try to seek assurances from their PR team or something. But Adobe was very, very front and center and clear in their messaging about trying to protect people. So yeah, indemnification is an interesting way to go about it, and I'd say it's a pretty good. Like, I trust Adobe. They make lots of money. It's a massive company. They own the graphics design industry. It's their jam. So when they say they'll protect your output, I believe in. Great question. And that might be it for me. So if you have any questions at all, anybody ask in the forums. If not, I wish you a good week, and I'll be here same time next week. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, Ruben.
Bye-bye.